No point in burying the lead with this story right here because we got news that Courtney Cox has confirmed that she's going to be returning for Scream 7. Now, this comes after it was previously announced that Neve Campbell would also be returning to Scream 7 too. Previously, Neve Campbell was out of Scream 6 because of a budget dispute, but that was since resolved. Courtney Cox, at this point, it was up in the air whether she would actually come back to the franchise, but it looks like a deal has been reached with the studio and she will be returning. Courtney Cox confirmed her return for Scream 7 after major cast shakeup, and the shakeup had to deal with Jenna Ortega and Melissa Barrera removed from the project, so I'll get more on that in a moment. Courtney Cox is officially returning to the Scream franchise for its highly anticipated 7th installment, despite a wave of major cast shakeups, with stars of the 6th installment, Melissa Barrera and Jenna Ortega, exiting due to controversy and scheduling conflicts. The casting lineup has shifted dramatically. Only Jasmine Savoy Brown and Mason Gooding are expected to return, leaving Courtney Cox's Gale Weathers as the iconic slasher's longest standing character. And that's because Courtney Cox at this point is the only character who's been in all the Scream movies so far. And the studio was initially trying to push the narrative in the direction of Jenna Ortega and Melissa Barrera's characters, the Carpenter sisters. But Jenna Ortega decided to leave the project because she wanted to focus on Wednesday, because that's something that she actually cared about a lot more than with Scream. Both her and Melissa Barrera signed a 2-picture deal when they first signed on for Scream 5. So both their contracts were up for negotiation. Melissa Barrera previously actually signed another contract with the studio, but after Jenna Ortega left, the writers couldn't figure out what to do with her character. Then later she made some posts on social media that they were saying was anti-Semitic, and they fired her as a result. I don't think it was necessarily because of those posts. I think it was literally just because they were trying to find some excuse to get out of the contract with her because they didn't know what to do without Jenna Ortega involved. So they just use that as an excuse because you can kind of interpret what she says as being anti-Semitic. Whether or not they actually were, it's up for a matter of opinion, but still they got rid of her as a result. So then the studio was left trying to figure out what they're going to do moving forward. And then they went back to try to negotiate with Neve Campbell, and they decided to pay her more than what she was asking for the previous movie. So she came back, and it looks like they're also bringing back Courtney Cox as well. Kevin Williamson, the original writer of the Scream movies, is also set to direct this one after they've gone through several other directors and they couldn't figure out what to make it work with them. I'm the longest running Scream Queen, so I guess I can't stop now. And that's something Courtney Cox said previously, or just this last week. The status of Hayden Panettiere, a character who made a comeback in Scream 6, remains uncertain. The franchise is also seeing changes behind the scenes, with Christopher Landon no longer directing. Kevin Williamson, the original screenwriter, will now take the helm for the 7th film, which is slated for release in 2026. And as someone who is a little bit older and grew up with the original Scream series, I kind of prefer this casting as opposed to the newer casting that they had for Scream 5 and 6. Now, I didn't hate those movies. I didn't think they were necessarily bad, but I didn't think they were spectacular either. I don't know. I mean, there's just something that felt kind of off with it. I can understand why a lot of younger audiences kind of took to those movies as opposed to some of the original ones. But I think if you're a fan of the original Scream movies, this is a lot better news to have it starring the cast that we all know versus what we saw with Scream 6, where it was a completely new cast right there. At least when it came to Scream 5, you still had Neve Campbell. Courtney Cox was in 5 and 6, but she kind of had a smaller role in 6. It really was about this new cast that they had. So I kind of like what they're doing. At least I like the idea of bringing it back to kind of coming around to its roots, so to speak. Even if the handoff to the new generation wasn't necessarily the worst handoff that I've seen in a lot of these newer franchises, they were kind of handling it with some semblance of respect, even if I personally didn't care for the direction that they were going with it. Or at least a month ago, Courtney Cox had said she was kind of in negotiations with the studio about whether or not she would actually return. And some of the stuff that she was saying, that she actually wishes they would bring back David Arquette in some way, shape, or form, even though they did kill off his character in the 5th movie. And there's some talk about like any different manners of which they could bring his character back, because that was something I thought it wasn't necessarily a bad decision to kill off his character in the 5th movie, but I just didn't like the manner of which it was done, especially when it comes to find out that the person who ended up killing him, beating him in a hand-to-hand fight, was basically a girl who was 90 pounds soaking wet. At that point, I was like, okay, come on, am I supposed to really believe that that's how it happened? There's no way she would have actually won in a fight with him. And I think that kind of took me out of it. I remember even thinking to myself when I was first watching it, trying to figure out who the potential killer could be. I was like, okay, definitely can't be any of these girls because there's no way they would have actually won that fight. Well, apparently that's just the direction that they went with that. I was like, okay, fine. You might as well have just made the character superhuman and give them superpowers if you're just going to go ridiculous like that. But this old article where Courtney Cox was talking about the negotiating process and bringing back David Arquette, this is what she had to say about it. I understand the reasons they did it, and she's talking about killing off his character, but whoa, talk about a missed character. Cox told me at a Rock for EB charity event Saturday, Dewey is so loved by Scream fans, they have to figure it out. It turns out Cox has yet to sign on for Scream 7, as I first reported in March. Cox began talks to reprise Gale Weathers in the 7th installment of the franchise following the announcement that Neve Campbell would return after skipping Scream 6 due to a salary dispute. And now apparently it's been confirmed now that Courtney Cox is actually going to be coming back to the franchise, even though, there was some dispute about it and some negotiation with the process. But like I said, I think this is actually a good step for the movie. Now, I know there's a lot of people who are fans of 5 and 6, like a lot of the younger audiences who are kind of put off by the idea that Jenna Ortega voluntarily left the project before Melissa Barrera was fired from the project. So they're going to try to boycott this in other way, shape, or form because they don't like the idea that characters that they liked are no longer going to be in it. And I can kind of understand them not wanting to watch this, but for a lot of the older Scream fans, I think this is kind of a welcome change, kind of going back to how things used to be. At least that's how I personally view it. Some people would point out, though, it even says that in the article about how successful the last Scream movie was, saying that Scream 6 was the highest gross, or at least it had the highest opening for any Scream movie, but that's also counting out the idea that, or at least not adjusting for inflation for Scream 2 and 3. If you do that, then Scream 6 would be behind behind the first 3 movies as far as box office gross. So it did better than 4 and it did better than 5, but it's not like it's a spectacular movie. And that's why I think the studio is a little bit more willing to kind of return to its roots, because even though the last one did pretty well, it's not like the new cast that they brought in is really that needed. It's not like this is their franchise or anything like that. This is still very much Neve Campbell and Courtney Cox's franchise. They're the ones who actually built it. They're the characters that are recognizable with it, kind of up there with Ghostface himself. So I think if you are going to try to replace some lead characters, replacing the new lead characters is probably a good approach if they want to make a movie that would still be successful. And when you have a new Scream movie coming out and they're going to advertise it as like, oh, it's Return with Neve Campbell and Courtney Cox in it again, it's going to be just like the original ones. I think that's going to do a lot more to actually drive out audiences as opposed to it's another movie with Jenna Ortega and Melissa Barrera in it. But at least that's what I think about all this. Let me know what you think about this in the comment section below. And also, if you haven't already, make sure you click that subscribe button if you want to stay up to date with the latest entertainment news. And don't forget to click that like button and share this video out there because it really helps out with the channel. Thank you.